Hi everyone, welcome to the 7th episode of the QBIN podcast. After a little break for the holidays, I am happy to present to you this episode with Dr. Kacie Deters, a professor at the University of San Francisco, California. Here we talked about different racial disparities within the field of neuroimaging, from access to research centers to the validity of different tests among different populations. We also discussed difficult topics such as the benefits and pitfalls of inclusivity initiatives and the place of bigger institutions within these initiatives. We ended this podcast by talking about Dr. Kacie Deters' career, which is a story of resilience and courage that I really enjoyed hearing. I hope you like this. So hello to our QBIN listeners again. I hope you're doing very well. So today we have Dr. Kacie Deters with us, and I'm going to let her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kacie Deters. I'm an assistant professor at UC Los Angeles in sunny California, and I am a health equity researcher studying Alzheimer's disease and dementia, specifically for the Black community.
Nice. So how was it for you, like becoming a student to becoming a PI?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question because I feel like I can talk so much on that. The transitions have always been challenging because it is. I mean, you transition to a higher and a higher stage, and it comes with different responsibilities. So it probably honestly took me around like a year to get settled into every new position. But then once you're settled, you're in it, and you're like, oh wow, I could do that. I did that. So it was challenging, but I think actually probably one of the most rewarding things is that I did do it. I made it through between undergrad, where I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I took a year off. To my master's program where I still didn't know where I wanted to do. So I took a year off, and then I did a PhD program. And even after my PhD program, I still did not know what I wanted to do. And I ended up doing a postdoc and falling in love with the research that I'm doing now. But every transition was really rough for me as well, just because I actually did not get into this field with the mindset of, I'm going to be a PI, I'm going to be faculty. I honestly just was not sure what I wanted to do. So the transitions have been pretty crazy for me.
I think a crazy thing because I'm still very early on in that path, is like you become so much more confident. Like you start out being like, I cannot do anything. And then you finish, you're like, oh, I have a deadline today. It's fine. I can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the confidence for me has been probably one of the biggest things I've grown in. I definitely had really bad imposter syndrome and still do have imposter syndrome. But I like to really look back and reflect on the amount that I've grown from, basically cowering in a corner, just like listening to everyone. Okay, sure, yes, to actually speaking my mind and stating things that I need and that I want. So, yeah, I think it's just been like a real thrill for me to see myself grow as a person too, and it's helped me in my everyday life too, right? Not just in academia. It's just helping me find my voice in everyday life too.
If you could pinpoint like really one challenge that you were like, this is very intense when you become a PI, do you know what would it be?
Oh my goodness, so many. I think I know. The biggest challenge, I think for me, is adjusting to all of the meetings, all of the emails. So I guess maybe let's just say let's wrap it up as like the admin part.
Yes.
You're basically solely doing research up until that point. Maybe you TA a class, maybe even teach a class somewhere, but it's been pretty much research, right? And now all of a sudden you're basically like a small business owner. You have a budget, you have to hire people, you have to, maybe you have to pay for your office depending on where you're at. And so there's no training for that coming into this at all. And so trying to stay organized and handle all of the, I'll just say admin related stuff has probably been the biggest challenge. And then trying to squeeze in my research, which I shouldn't even say squeeze in, right? Because that's the main reason I'm here. But like, it really does end up like that. It really does. You end up feeling like, oh my gosh, I forgot about my research today. So yeah.
That is crazy. That's something I did not expect until I talked to some PIs. They're like, yeah, I'm basically managing a business. And I'm like, oh. So
yeah, absolutely.
do you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing at the moment in your lab? And I know because, I basically, if for people that don't know, you were in Amsterdam and gave this talk at I believe the imaging portion
Mhm.
of the day, which is how like I was pretty much amazed by what you presented. And I
Thank
wanted
you.
to know, like, what is the place of neuroimaging in the topics you look at the moment?
Yes, I've really, really been interested in, risk factors for dementia and Alzheimer's disease, cognitive decline,
Mhm.
particularly in the Black community. And this kind of is going back a little bit, but I did not do this work for my PhD. I even got hired as a postdoc to do tau imaging work, for the cohort they were building at Stanford. So it was actually the first day on the job where my PI took me to breakfast and just for us to have like a little meet and greet. And I just told her about my interest. I was like, I'm so excited to be here, can't wait for the work. And then we were just talking science, and in the midst of talking science, I let her know about my interest in uh health disparities research. And she was like, oh, so am I. She was like, I'm actually really excited. She's like, you can do a project in that. And she started naming off some people that she's wanting to work with. And from there, it kind of just took off. I ended up actually getting paired with Dr. Lisa Barnes, who's at Rush University, who still to this day, and that was like 2017 to now, is still been a mentor for me, whether just reaching out to her when I need or on grants. But we ended up putting in an Alzheimer's Association grant while I was a postdoc. And that's when my first experience actually in health disparities research, and it just took off from there. So when you think about it, I've actually really only been in health equity research for like, 5 or 6 years now, 6, 7 years, however long 2017 to 2023 is. um,
Yeah, with the
but
pandemic, time is kind of weird.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's all a blur right now. But yeah, so starting back then, we still, even though health equity research was not my postdoc PI's main strength, imaging was, or is actually. And so we kind of combined forces, and I do have like a publication in neurology out from 2021, where, for example, we looked at amyloid measured via a neuroimaging technique called PET, or positron emission tomography. So amyloid protein is one of the it's one of the main proteins, proteinopathies or proteins for Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah.
And so amyloid and tau. And so you can measure amyloid in the brain, using imaging. And to this date, most science is done in European or white people, right? And so there has not been really any data at that time, especially that had a large number of amyloid in Black individuals. I think there was only like one paper at that time that was out. So we had access to a data set where we were able to look at amyloid in Black individuals. And so we did. We looked at we looked at the amyloid, sorry, in Black and white individuals from this cohort, and we actually saw that Black individuals seem to have lower amyloid, which is quote unquote better. So a better, like more normal levels of amyloid relative to white individuals. And another thing that was really interesting about that as well is that not only was the amyloid lower, but another risk factor for Alzheimer's disease is a gene called ApoE4. And so ApoE4, you would expect that it would produce, like worse amyloid, for example, or be associated with worse amyloid. But that lower amyloid was actually in people who had the ApoE4, Black ApoE4 carriers. And so that was really interesting because you have two risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, but it's actually quote unquote better in Black individuals. So it's really my first insight into, wow, we have all these risk factors that are, really quote unquote established for Alzheimer's disease and dementia, but it's not the same. It's not relating the same to this Black cohort that we were studying at the time. So that is an example of a way that I've looked at, like health disparities research with imaging and trying to find that out. Yeah.
So you've mentioned your breakfast with your PI and also this paper that you were able to do, but is there any other moment that you were like, oh my God, like we need to look at this a little bit more, apart from these two times where you literally you saw that there was a difference?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So imaging is definitely always going to be important in my life. So right now, I've been faculty member at UCLA for just over a year. So it's been it's I'm still growing my lab and starting everything, and so I actually do have an RA or a research assistant who's here working on neuroimaging for me, but it takes a lot to process scans. And so for her to get trained, because I'm a new lab, so I have to do all the training on top of everything. But she's been doing really great. We're actually, finishing up with some MRI scans and some they're called flares, or it's another type of MRI where you can look at vascular burden in the brain. And so she's been processing those two type of MRIs. And eventually, yes, we're going to start looking at other risk factors in association with neuroimaging measures and start to try to see if we can uncover some type of pathway or association or mechanism, whatever, term in Black individuals. So.
I know you've mentioned like a few examples, for example, disparities in terms of like inclusions of sample, which I know from being in the field that there may be, I mean, I could count on one hand the amount of representative samples we have in the whole field, which is very, very large. Do you know if there are other disparities that exist in your imaging research in terms of minorities versus white people? Like beyond the samples, which is a big issue on its own as well.
So, sorry, just a clarifying question. Do you mean like mechanistically or pathway, or do you mean just like, criteria or access?
Maybe more access and criteria. Like,
Gotcha.
where do you think the disparities are in terms of like the research, especially the inclusion? Because we know a lot about European men specifically, and specifically of higher education as well, which is a very important aspect. Like, for example, our cohort, we work with the Prevent 80. Most of them are like have university degrees and all that, which is not representative of the whole population. But our criterias are used everywhere in the world, right?
Yeah. So when it comes to, let's just say, biomarker access, to kind of sum that up, that I think, that's what I talked about at the Alzheimer's Imaging Consortium at the Alzheimer's conference in Amsterdam recently. So I want to actually just mention really quick, there's a really awesome review paper on this from some PhD students, actually. They're no longer PhD students, or one's a PhD student, one's a grad student. I don't remember. Anyway, don't quote me on their position. But the point is, they are not faculty. So I just think it was really amazing that they put this together. But they do have a review paper out about this, especially when it comes about exclusion and inclusion. And it's from Jocelyn Ricard and Tamara Parker. They're the first two co-authors for this review paper, and it's a really great paper. So I just wanted to mention that real quick, because I'm going to talk, like, what I talk about actually is in that paper as well, but I really like to highlight them. So yeah, there's so many different types of issues regarding like biomarker access. So I think you mentioned one thing, and that is, right now science is really white. We don't do a great job at all of recruiting non-white populations. And I say we don't do a good job because it is us, right? We're the ones who are out there, supposed to be in the community and building trust and, doing research the appropriate way. It takes specific cultural tailored tools and methods in order to reach different communities, right? We are not all the same people. Even within one county, right? There can be different types of people. So you really, really putting in the work to focus on the structure of our outreach, I think, is really, really important. And I think more work needs to be done on that. So I think that's one thing. And I think another thing that people don't often think about, and is also in this review article, is even just the tools we're using. So I talked about this previously in a talk, but I'm recently now bringing it in more. But even just thinking about hair. If you want to think about hairstyles that are culturally in separate cultures, and that can actually impact access to neuroimaging techniques. So, for example, if you have more tightly coiled hair, you can have trouble getting in the EEG. Yeah, sorry. I was like, what? The EEG electrode, there you go, like attached to your brain. I'm sorry, attached to your scalp. That can be more challenging, and you don't reach and you don't get the strongest signal. There are sew-ins, for example, or different types of hairstyles where there's that might interact with like the MRI scanner, for example. And so those folks may not want to be in the scanner. Or are not able to. So I think that's a really big thing about access as well. And then also just talking about location.
Yeah.
I think location's a big one. Most universities are in more affluent areas. So, and you think about who does not live in the most affluent areas. And unfortunately, well, I'm not even getting to that, into that bandwagon about structural racism and everything that's been happening in our country. But, the people that are underserved are not near the centers. And so having to travel wide and far just to get in, an imaging scan is also an issue. So yeah, I think those are some really big ones.
I think there's also like the access to knowledge in the sense that not everybody is in contact with science, in the sense that, for example, some cohorts, like I mentioned, have a higher education. So they have access to the centers and the places where you have like all those flyers and people mentioning the studies, which like a lot of researchers complain they don't have like a representative sample, but at the same time, they don't go like further away to recruit people. I mean, I say researchers, but like me as well, right? Like I'm not there in the field recruiting either. But I think this knowledge transfer has to be like done in a better way where we have a wider audience and we can reach more people that might need this information, because everybody deserves to be healthy.
Absolutely, Béry. I think that's, it's really crucial. And that goes back to that, the first point I was discussing, where we really need to put in the effort for, really, really culturally tailored outreach programs. And I think another thing, just touching on what you were just talking about, is like, you think about healthcare access. And a lot of people end up in cohorts because they were referred by a physician, or they saw a flyer specifically in a healthcare office rather than maybe just a community center. And so that also already biases the sample.
A lot too, like for the samples, depending on what your criteria is, but it's also like word to mouth, like in people talk to your friends, they know about it. But if you have no friends that are in contact with that, then it's a bit more complex.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely.
So you mentioned that being a Black person with ApoE4 was associated with having less amyloid, sorry. Do you know any other biomarkers or even quantitative measures that are different in between different populations?
Yeah, so, I kind of like to sum this up by saying all of the tools that we use in science were, tested and validated, using a white or European population. You almost always see a quote unquote disparity when it's white to any other group. So cognition, for example, or memory, all the time, if you are looking at the score, for example, that a group of people, like say a group of Black people versus a group of white people, it always looks like the white group has, again, quote unquote, better memory relative to the Black group, or again, in most other racial groups as well. That's because, these tools were developed for and validated, in white people. So, for example, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Boston naming test, BNT.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I think, a lot of people in the field might be aware that, so this test, for anyone who doesn't know, there's pictures, and the participant is shown a picture and they say what it is. So for example, it'll be like a pencil, it'll be a picture of pencil, it's shown, and then the person says pencil, and then they get a point. Up until recently, there used to be a noose in the Boston naming test. a noose. Can you imagine how tragic, traumatic that could be for not only people of color, for people of color, but also what if you're an administrator and you're a person of color, you
Mhm.
know? And this is something that a lot of neuropsychologists overlooked. They just went with it because it was in there.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm not a neuropsychologist, so I didn't do testing. Uh, but I've heard stories from some of the other, senior neuropsychologists, including people of color, who have said, um, this also can skew tests, right? When we think about disparities, right? Some people would just not want to answer the question. They're like, I'm not going to say what that is. And then you lose a point. Or maybe the administrator just doesn't want to, uh, talk about it. There's also been, you can imagine the stress that comes from seeing that. And then how does that actually skew the rest of the testing for the day
Mhm.
if, you're feeling a certain type of way? So I think, I always like to use that. Oh, I don't like it. It sucks. But, that's just such a prime example of how neuropsychological test was literally created and validated,
Oh, yes.
for white people. And so I like to say it's hard to answer the question about what disparities exist because all of the tools we use were made for white individuals. There's always a disparity when you look. So I think we're still uncovering a lot of like true what, disparities exist in the risk factors. Um, so yeah, it's even my study, right? My study is one study. There's been other studies that have not replicated that. And
Mhm.
I think it's because, Black individuals themselves were a real heterogeneous group.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's why my lab now too, we're so focused on looking at just within Black individuals, because yeah, if we keep comparing to white individuals, of course there's going to be disparity. Also, white people are not the gold standard for research. We need to start putting the focus in within our community. So.
Although it's such a great point. Like I have seen papers that you see like white and then you have another section like other. So where you really
Yeah.
pull people like everyone becomes the same thing and then it's like very diminishing, because everybody has
Yes.
different experiences, different exposures to different, I don't know, environments and stuff like that. And fun fact for people that don't know, there's a whole field called cultural psychiatry that is
Hmm.
a field that was basically built to be more culturally knowledgeable. And you have so many different tools. And I think it's such a bummer that in neuroimaging, we're not in more contact with that field, just in terms of like translating questionnaires and making them more culturally appropriate and stuff like that. It makes like the whole difference in terms of results, but also trusting the person that's speaking to you. Like you don't know me and you have a whole history of having issues with a certain group. It's difficult for you to talk to me in a way that is not biased or to be focused maybe on what I'm telling you because you're maybe scared or you feel like uncomfortable.
Hmm.
I felt this way with I mean, in case you don't know, like I'm a woman, and I felt more comfortable with other women. So like I
Hmm.
think it can be the same for race. So it would be interesting to have more like a cross-disciplinary communication, which brings me to a question that I adore. So
Hmm.
when we do international conferences, the conference itself and other universities love to talk about their effort at being more inclusive. So, what are your thoughts on that? Are they actually doing a good job, or you feel like it's more like all talk, for lack of a better word?
Yeah. So do you mean how are they being more inclusive at the conference or just the universities in general?
So I
Like,
kind of like to pair both together because we have this inner joke with my friends that, universities will like on their flyer, you will see like
mm,
a colorful flyer, but then you go in the university and it's not that colorful anymore, right?
right.
Think for
Got it. Okay. Yeah, yeah. So, that's a hard question. As faculty, you're exposed to a whole new level of hierarchy that I did not know, really understand how it existed. So what I see is I here at UCLA especially, I definitely see effort to create a more inclusive environment. However, you cannot change an individual person, right? And I think that's something that's really important to remember. You can have a larger group that really wants to make a difference, but just one person or even two people, right? But just one person can actually really um, hinder that. So I think that that's really, really important to remember, that about those things. So, and I think another part about that when it comes to being more inclusive, one person can also make a difference in a positive way,
Yeah.
right? Regardless of how, for example, your department may look, you can always continue to preach at meetings, at seminars, in your lab about inclusive practices. The more you speak it, the more people will hear it, and hopefully the more they'll change or keep open to discussion. But one thing it's like, for example, one thing I don't back down on is talking about how important it is that we just focus on research within Black people and that we do not have to center whiteness. I definitely get some scoffs at that when I talk about that still continually. And that's because some people just don't understand, and some people are unfortunately a little closed-minded, and you cannot change an individual person, but you can create a better experience for yourself at a place. And
Would you say that they are dismissive? Because I know two types of people that are dismissive. There are the people that just think that a white sample is the gold standard. But then you also have the people that don't believe that, but just think that minorities are not accessible. So they will not make the effort and will not believe that you can have a sample that is representative. I don't know if you see what I mean.
So, but what's the question with that?
So in the sense that the people that often will maybe react in a more negative way towards you, would you say that it's because they just don't believe that we could get a representative sample, or it's because they think white is the way to go? Like
I think it's, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
In terms of, yeah, no, so I actually think it's because people hear me just say the word whiteness or that we center white. I just think even that statement itself, for some people, they're like, what? No, we don't. No, they know one person, for example, who does it. That's been my gut feeling with some of the scoffs I've gotten. It's just because I'm so direct with it. People aren't used to having that direct. Yeah, honestly. And, it was honestly the when I started incorporating that into my talks, I was definitely sweating a lot. I was real nervous because it is really direct. And a lot of times people really skirt around sensitive issues. But I don't want to skirt around it anymore. I like that I'm direct, and I think it has the most impact, and I will accept the scoffs because until I stop hearing scoffs, I know that it's not understood by people. And so continuing to be direct in the way we speak and not skirt around issues and just saying, no, science is white. Science is centered around whiteness. White people are not the gold standard. We do not have to compare all of our groups to a white population. Saying those statements as clearly as possible, for example, is just the most direct way that I could get at talking about research, and not only inclusive research. And you do have to convince people. So when we talk about inclusivity, there's not many people that do the health equity research that we do. And I'm hoping to increase that. So I'm finding people slowly here at UCLA and other places nearby that do it, that I can collaborate with. But the more that we can get people, on the understanding side of this, the better. Although that does talk about inclusivity of research. I know you're talking about inclusivity at universities, which is still something, like
both, yeah, they kind of come hand in hand, yeah.
They do, because they have to hire you, right? So I mean, if they don't believe in the research you do, they won't hire you. And so hopefully they are a more inclusive, or they're trying to be more inclusive by bringing people like such as myself, into their space. So I'm the first one in my department that does what I do, but my department is really heterogeneous as far as the type of model system and thing they study. But I've been collaborating with other people around here, and it's been great. Also, I think just continuing to attend whatever university-related events they have surrounding like inclusivity and JEDI work, JEDI being, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and being a voice. We have to just keep being a voice rather than just sitting here and expect somebody on the back end, because unfortunately, although they should, there are so many people that it requires to make a change. You think it would be easy, but unfortunately, like I said, there's always one person who, unfortunately, you've probably been in a meeting yourself where you see one person who's arguing against inclusivity without arguing against it, right? It's
Yeah,
a
and
challenge.
it's often recurring like argument of like, and one big reason why, the Amsterdam, like that consortium specifically that you were participating in, and I say it like very directly, but I was quite disappointed because I felt like all this inclusivity talk just went under the rug, like people
Mm-hmm.
just didn't focus on it and didn't like I don't want to say disregard it because it's not true. They addressed it, but I don't think it was done in a proper way. Like I can very well remember this talk of like, but we should make like better guidelines and then we'll see if we have time, later,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll focus on other people. And then when you hear stuff like that, you're like, it's kind of you're like, oh, should I like engage with this? Should I just let it go? It's like it's complicated. And you have the whole other issue of like, do I want people to see me only for my origins too? Like so it's a that's
No, you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot of challenges that come with that. And you had said something that I was going to respond to, and I literally forgot what you said. But I was like, I just wanted to respond to this. But I think it can be as far as like you talked about like at the conference talking about inclusivity and then not seeing that up above, whether it's talking about it or the research. Oh yes, that's it. So yeah, unfortunately, health equity research has always been an afterthought. It's I can still give talks today where there's somebody in the room who didn't realize that the risk factors were different, for other groups, for example, for Alzheimer's disease. Hopefully, with more and more researchers going out there and getting a platform that can change. And it's also up to organizers for panels, for example. You should look at the people that are on the panel and try to increase that. But I think that's a problem that we have though right now, right? Like if you look about the panel I was on, how many people are people of color that do what I do? And there's not a lot. And so if they're not there,
it
first of
was
all, then they
just
just
you.
can't be on the, yeah, I
So
know, but I mean, but there are other people who do research similar to who
yes.
to what I do that could have been on the panel, but there's not a lot of us at all. And if they're not there at the conference, I mean, like then they can't be on the panel. So if you think about it's just literally like percentage as well, right? And so we have to increase that though, right? And that comes, and this is the big thing, right? This is at all stages. Not only do we need to increase researchers, we need to increase access to science, which starts when you're young, right? Like going into schools and talking about science and getting people interested in seeing what it's like, so that maybe they actually go to college and with the desire to want to do science versus having to figure it out the long way, which is what I did. I actually had no idea about any of this when I went to undergrad at all. So again, how I got here is really weird in this faculty position, but um, so yeah, we need to just increase representation, I think, overall in all spaces, across all levels, access to information, in order to actually increase the representation. So
Let's take a little break to absorb this new information. In the meantime, do not forget to visit our YouTube channel for more podcast episodes and also visit the QBIN blog where we post news about the network. Little spoiler, the QBIN Research Day will be on the 23rd of May at Concordia University. Do not forget to submit your abstract and to register. Let's get back to the podcast. So that was basically, you really touched upon like the next question, which is like, like the hard question, like how can we be more engaging with everybody? Because like you mentioned, it starts from a very young age, but also like some outreach programs will not go everywhere. They won't go in like, I know for Canada, they won't go in certain neighborhoods, like they will just target some places, and most of those places are not like,
Mhm.
they're not necessarily, let's say they're a bit richer neighborhoods.
Yeah.
It's and even like the time your parents can take off in the day or stuff like that, it's a lot of things coming all together to create something different, like an environment.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues that I've come to recognize now that I'm at the position I'm at is funding. It takes money to go out into the community, and unfortunately, until recently, to my knowledge, there's only been one grant, one NIH related grant that actually relates to funding a community related event, because research is typically, funds is been more like wet lab, for example, where you have to collect data, like quantitative or qualitative data. And going out to the community and giving back doesn't necessarily give you that. It doesn't give you quantitative, qualitative data. You're literally just giving back to the community in order to increase access. But and it's important and it's needed, but unfortunately, it's not funded. So you do have to find that money from somewhere else. Or it's not funded from the government, I'm sorry. So you do have to find that money from somewhere else, whether it be like state programs, institutional, foundational grants. And so first and foremost, I just want to mention that because now that I'm in this position as well, I've come to realize that how important it is to be able to provide, right? Renting space, providing snacks, maybe having some swag or something like that, right? Holding different seminars. If you have a speaker come, if you need to pay the speaker, there's just it does take time and money, and also just traveling, right? Yes. So I think that's one of the big things. But then, yeah, I think that more programs should be implemented for the school. For example, universities always have money. I really think that there should be programs. Actually, when I was a PhD student at Indiana University, School of Medicine in Indianapolis, there was a neuroscience program where different faculty would volunteer for different days. And then there was different schools from elementary all the way to high school around the Indianapolis area that we would go to and just give presentations on science and demonstrations and stuff like that and participate. I thought it was really cool. It was real engaging, especially, the high schoolers, not so, not so much engaging. They were like, oh my God, we have to sit through another. But especially the elementary kids, you could tell they were super engaged because, again, of the demonstrations and trying to figure stuff out, like do the activities. And it was really awesome. And I actually loved that program. And I wish that there were more of that out there. And maybe there are, but I feel like if there are, I don't know about them. I don't probably should be bigger. It should be more, right? But again, all of that takes money and it takes time. Yeah. So all of that is definitely needed that you mentioned. But it's harder than it looks. It's really hard. And that's okay. I hired somebody actually. Again, this is where the money part comes in, right? People have to, and people have to be serious about what they want and what they do. Like if you say I need to increase the representation in my sample, then you need to put money, you need to put time behind it. So what I did is I actually hired somebody whose sole purpose is to be in the community. Mm-hmm. So I'm choosing to spend a part of my budget as a small business owner, right, running the lab, for this person to be out there because it's needed. And I want to put my money where my mouth is, right? Like it's important to me. And so rather than just saying it, I need to start doing it. And now I'm in that position that I can do it. And I'm hoping that I can, change at least the experience of people in Southern California.
I actually am very curious to know, like, what are the tasks of that person that is going in the community?
Mm-hmm. So she's only been with me for 2 months, and so just started going to the community. So we're still working on this, FYI, and this is also new for me. But so for example, there's community related events. Maybe there's like a health fair, or maybe there's somebody else who's already been incorporated with that community, and she just pops up to the meeting. But it's literally just engaging, like, hey, yeah, no, I'm talking with them, hearing their thoughts, their interests, figuring out what they need. We can provide for their needs, right? It's not just about getting them to come in and participate in our research, for me at least. I really actually want to give back to the community, and giving back to the community includes education. So I'm hoping to build like an education style platform here for geared toward Black people in Southern California, Los Angeles area, related to like educational seminars and things like that, and hopefully end in like a health fair next year. That's my goal. So so those are some of her tasks. And then also following up with people, right? So you go to an event and you meet people. For example, there are people who have started their own organization for like caregivers, for example. So then you have to follow up and meet with them, and you have to keep the relationships alive. And if they host something, and they invite you, then you have to go to that. And it's great, right? Because you're now present and you're like, hey, I'm representing UCLA, I'm representing, Kacie Deters lab, and I'm here to support you. And then hopefully that can build into a relationship, and we can serve them. So if they're interested in in something, we can actually explore it in the lab based on their interest. And that's called like uh, community-based participatory research. I had to remember the acronym CBPR, community-based participatory research. But that's kind of the model that we're trying to build here, is not just doing research that we think needs to be done, but listening to the community and doing research that will help them.
I think that's a big point. Like a lot of people will lose contact with like the practical aspect of their fields, and they really stay into like more abstract and theoretical work. I think it's interesting to really understand people's needs, especially like, you know, like we don't know much about the aging process of like Black people and what that entails and like all the health risk related to that. Like especially in terms of dementia, I think we really focused more on like research for white people as opposed to understanding like other populations. So it's very nice to know like that there's someone really listening to people to kind of guide their research depending on that, as opposed to like deciding, oh, I think this is important, so we'll do this, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the point. And I think too, when you talk about building trust with the community, that's a way to build trust, right? It's not like this is what you need. No, tell me what you need, because you're the one actually living in that community, and how can I help you? So I think that's also just really part of building trust with the community in my eyes. Nobody wants to be told what to do, right? So so yeah.
Is there so basically with those participants, did you also take the time to kind of explain different tools and stuff like that, just so like they know what they're getting into?
Well, it depends on
the educational part of it.
Yeah, so it depends on what's happening. So at community events, typically we're not going that deep. But when it comes to education, I think, yes, that's going to be part of the education. It's really introducing them to what research is and what is done, so that they can feel as comfortable as possible if they choose to. Again, I'm not doing this for them like you have to now join my cohort. It's really just to educate them. And then again, you talked about earlier, you mentioned Béry, word of mouth. That's also important, right? If we can really help them to understand the different research tools that we use and answer any questions, then, you know, maybe they talk to a friend about, oh, they attended this seminar and they learned about this, you know, and that it seemed, you know, like maybe they'll give it a try, or, you know, maybe they're interested in just having people understand what it is that we do is really important.
So my next question is quite related to that as well. So we're talking about inclusivity and also accessibility. So according to you, what would you say are maybe the challenges of the future in the field? Like what are the challenges at the moment, and what do you foresee that might be a challenge later as well?
Yeah, so I think a challenge currently is something I touched on earlier, so I won't go too in depth, but I think funding for community related activities. I think that's the biggest challenge that I face right now. And then a future challenge, let's assume that the money part gets fixed and then there's more like NIH funding and things like that to host this. I think the next challenge is actually focusing on tools that are specific for the Black community, which is honestly, that's a current challenge too. I mean, it's hard. All of the future challenges, I think, are current challenges. So I think that's goes hand in hand. But I just think that the tools and understanding, right, when you go to the doctor and you have to look at like your iron levels or something, right? You know, there's like a scale, but the scales are usually all dependent on white samples. And I'm not a medical doctor, but I do know that there are some things already, right, that depending on your ethnic or racial group, the measure's different.
Yes.
And so we need to figure out, rather than just norming, we need to actually create tools, create methods that are specific or can be specific for within ethnic and racialized group in order to create accurate measures. Because without accurate measures, it's going to be really hard to accurately predict risk of any disease. It's going to bias.
Even give people the proper treatment. If you don't understand like what's going on in their body, it's very difficult. And I was curious by tools. So here you mentioned like medical tools and thresholds and all that. But do you also like in tools, can we also include like neuroimaging tools and also questionnaires and stuff like that we need to maybe tailor a little bit better?
Yes, absolutely. All of those. Yeah. So when I say tools, I literally mean any way that we collect qualitative or quantitative data. So,
I
yeah.
see. So in terms of that, how do you think we can become better? Like, and in terms of tools and also more inclusive, like being more
Mhm.
inclusive.
I think you mentioned earlier about the whole field of cultural neuropsychology.
Yeah.
So, there just needs to be people that are interested in this in order to get to dedicate to creating specific measures. Um, I am not a methodologist. I don't do that. I'm more the application research side. Uh, but there needs to be more people that are focused on that. And I think it's really critical. Or even understanding the limitations of the current tools we have now. I'm not sure that we honestly, that we do have a grasp on the full scale of the limitations. And that's something that I've been looking into too. So, for example, taking questionnaires that are just applied to all groups, but then actually taking a deeper dive and saying, how does this questionnaire actually um, function within Black, within Hispanic or Latino, and really understanding what it's capturing.
I one thing that I kept thinking about before it was also like this idea of like willpower, like
Hmm.
also passion. Like you said that you, because you're passionate about this topic, you decided to send someone in the community. But I think
Hmm.
also like as researchers, like having this passion to like push this topic and like and work on these questionnaires and work on these new tools and stuff like that. I think we need to be more passionate about this and send people that actually have the willpower to do it because it's harder, right? Like it's a
Hmm.
bit harder.
It is. And so rather than developing new tools, people are really just taking the current tools and trying to figure out how they can be used. And I mean, whatever works, works, honestly, but we just really need like more accurate, precise measurements. So,
I see. So this is my favorite question to ask pretty much everybody because everybody
hmm
has like, very different answers. So if you could talk to your younger self, what would you say? Anything you
um,
would have done differently, or maybe not.
yeah. Like how young are we talking? I'm just kidding. Um, gosh.
It's a difficult question. Like people
It
often will like go back and then come back, and it's a
Yeah, I don't know that I could say anything. And you want to know why? I didn't go in depth in this, but I only decided to be faculty like 3 years ago. So I mean, I was inside, like, I didn't really talk about my path. I'm gonna like, again, I'm gonna deviate from the question a little bit, but I didn't
That's
necessarily
okay.
talk about my path in full. But I went to undergrad because you were supposed to go to college. I didn't know anything. I'm first gen, come from a single parent household. Um, and it's just college. Not many people in my family went to college, and I just, I literally knew nothing. um, I went to college. I had like five different majors, and then I took a I don't I won I ended up in biology because I wanted to be pre-med like everybody, and then I took physics and I sucked, and then I was like, I am not about to do pre-med anymore, but I just stuck with being a biology major, and um anyway, that even kind of deviates a little bit. But the point is, I didn't even know I wanted to be faculty. Honestly, I think my journey is my journey to get me here. Um, so like if I were to go back and tell myself something, it would be, oh, hey, you're interested in being a PI, maybe just go straight to doing a PhD or something. I don't really know, but I actually like my journey the way it was because I took time to figure out what I liked. And um, did I take time to figure it out, or did I just not have any direction? Whatever you want to say, whichever you want to say. But yeah, I don't actually know what I would go back and say to myself.
I think every path is
Organize
like
better.
valuable. Like as a student, I often would hear like this one line path where everything just went how you wanted and like which is
Hmm.
not very realistic now I'm realizing.
No,
I
God, no.
people do so many things, but then it's such a bummer that we don't talk about it because as a student, if you're not at this certain level, at this age, time point, whatever in your life, you're like, oh, I'll never make it, Not
Yeah,
true.
and I want to share too, real quick, if you want to talk about that a little bit more. I failed three classes in undergrad. I had to take summer school. And I graduated with, I think, barely a 3.0. So I took a year off to figure out what I want to do because again, college is, and I worked 3 jobs in undergrad as well. I was paying for myself.
Mhm.
I took a year off because I did not know what I wanted to do. I had a biology degree because I wanted to be pre-med, and I was 5 different majors in the beginning, and I was like, I am not staying in college another year. So I finished and I went back and I just like did odd jobs or whatever. But then I decided to do a master's degree in biology just to do something. And I was like, I like teaching. And so I was like, maybe I'll just be a teacher. So I'll get a master's degree and I'll just like teach or something. But because of my poor grades, I got into only one master's program, and that was Cal State Dominguez Hills here in California, in Carson. And I did a master's there, and I did good grades. But because of that experience, there I got this grant called a Bridge to the Doctorate grant, and it paired me with Indiana University to do research, and that was the first time in my master's program. This was the first time that I really got hands-on like research experience in the context of like what it is at like I'm doing now. Um, and otherwise, before, like I was just like working at a gym and working at a restaurant and taking biology class, you know what I'm saying? I was never even RA. I never volunteered for a lab in undergrad because research just was not on my radar at all. So once I got that, I was like, oh, this is cool. Maybe I will do a PhD. I got into it because it was kind of an automatic into that PhD program as long as you didn't mess up. I mean, I had to apply and interview, of course, but I had
Yeah.
already worked with that PI. I ended up getting into the PhD program, working the PhD program. I was like, research is cool, but I don't love it. So I was like, I can still go back to teaching now, right? Whether, just went from teaching at a community college, but now I can teach at university level. So after my PhD program, when it's coming to an end, I applied for both teaching jobs and postdocs. And I just said, whatever comes first, comes first. I don't know. I was real tired. Like I said, I worked 3 jobs in undergrad. I also worked 3 and then 2 because I was tired in my master's program. I
Mhm.
worked a lot. And honestly, between that and school, I felt done already by the time I was like, 31 or 32, whatever, however old I was then I graduated. So I ended up getting the postdoc first, and then because I voiced my interest in doing disparities research, here I am. If she never would have let me do it, I do not know that I would be here, actually. I love health equity research. I did not love just the general research part of it.
Yes.
Um, I probably would have, maybe I would have stayed in science, but like as a project scientist or, just not
Mhm.
faculty. But I love what I do now. And if I didn't stay, like take opportunities as they were presented, it wouldn't have happened. But I don't know that I would go back to my inner self and say anything because I like the journey that
Mhm.
got me here because now I can honestly say that I do love it and I like it. So if I had to give like any advice or anything it wouldn't be to myself, it would be to other people, to younger scientists. And I would say just like follow your heart, follow your passion. If you need to take a year off, take a year off, and work or do whatever, have fun. Honestly, I took a year off between undergrad and my master's program as well because I really like to party. I was like 21. I don't know. I really like to
Yeah.
party. And so I was like, I'm done with school and I just worked and partied. um, I love to
That's
dance and I would go out dancing. I was in the best shape of my life because I was just dancing all the time. And but yeah, so it would just do what you feel you're going to. I would never want to look back on my life and say, dang, I wish I would have done that. And I
Mhm.
actually don't think I have. I think I allowed myself the opportunity to be young, to travel, to live life to the fullest without feeling the burden of other life stuff. There's always burden in life, but yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I know for a fact that your path is going to give hope to a few students for sure. Just for me, like you're sometimes
hmm
caught up in research and you think like, oh my God, nobody's feeling except me. But then you realize like everybody is getting into like different like path and potholes and whatever. And then
hmm
well, you learn and life is great.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah,
pretty.
absolutely. Oh, also just to mention real quick too, to give everyone hope, I failed my qualifying exam in my PhD program. So people don't know what a qualifying exam is. It's when you're in your PhD program, within a year or two, you end up having a big exam basically about the material in order to promote yourself into what's called candidacy. So you're either a pre-candidate or you're a post-candidate, for your PhD. So, and that exam again is called qualifying exam, or quals. So I actually failed my quals in my PhD. I mean, I cried. I failed one question out of four, but that's still a failure. And I had to redo it and prove myself to stay in the program. And I failed one class in my PhD. So I'm just not really good at school. And I just wanted to put that out there as well, because just because you struggle in something doesn't mean you can't do the job. Obviously, if my job was to be a student, I probably wouldn't do that, because I'm actually not great at test taking. The anxiety and everything is just not great. Doesn't mean I can't do research, right?
Yeah.
Does not mean I cannot do, and I've proved that time and time again, but I'm not a great student. So don't let failures, that's, I think if I were to give advice to, don't be discouraged from failures. You'll cry. It's fine. It still sucks at the time. It still sucks. But honestly, when I look back at all that, it's like a blimp in my life. It doesn't even have any impact.
Stronger in the end, Actually, fun fact for our listeners. I don't know if I've told this story before, but I found this outlier in my data at some point, and then everything fell apart when I removed it. And I remember crying for 3 days because of an outlier. And that's where I realized, you need to change your outlook on life. You cannot be that upset for an outlier. You cannot, you have to distance yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay to be upset. I don't want anyone to stifle their feelings, but recognize the scale of the mistake. Not finding an outlier, it's just a small. So you're allowed to be emotional, but then yes, you did the perfect thing. You just were like, it's just an outlier. I will fix this. And then you fix it and you move on. Yeah. Failure comes with being a scientist. I mean, you'll fail at experiments, you'll fail at grants, you'll be rejected from papers. So you're going to have to learn how to deal with failure somehow. Therapy
more than we think for
sure. I've been in therapy for a lot of my adult life, and definitely consistently now. And mental health is really important, especially because, again, failure is not something that people typically deal with in their everyday life, but we do as scientists. So there's a lot of things that to learn how to deal with as we proceed through, and the different career stages and the different moving. So I'm always a big proponent of making sure that my health and mental health are top notch first and foremost. And so therapy is also, finding the right one. It's kind of like dating, but you find the right one, and they'll work wonders for you and helping you to improve your confidence, which is something you talked about with me in the beginning.
Maybe the next podcast is about minorities in therapy.
There's a lot of big cultural differences.
Of course.
Yeah, there's a lot of big cultural differences when it comes to that. So yeah,
I mean, I personally can talk about this for hours and hours. I'm of the descent of you suffer in silence.
Yeah, and a lot of people are.
You progress beyond that, and it works for some people. So I'm not gonna every tweet your own. So we are approaching the end of this podcast. So is there anything that I have not mentioned that you would like to talk about? So here you can mention anything you want. So it can be your lab, your Twitter, anything that you would like to promote as well.
No, I think that this was a great podcast, and I really want to thank you for asking me to be here. I had a good time. My answers definitely droned on a little bit in my head, but but it was really, really great. I'm super happy that we got to do this. So thank you so much.
So do you have a Twitter so people can find you?
I do. It's at KCD_PhD.
Perfect.
So KCD PhD.
Anyway, when I post the podcast, I will add the link and also link to your lab for people that are very interested in this topic and want to know more. So thank you again for this, and I hope we can see each other at future conferences.
Yeah, absolutely. Stay in touch.
Take care.
Okay. Bye.